Hey guys, thanks for checking out Super Little Challenges. I'm your host Daniel Thomas, and my guest today is Aaron Trahan. Aaron is a performance and leadership coach who has leveraged his own background and training to help leaders with the implementation of systems, mental models, frameworks, growth programs, and external accountability so that they can accelerate their path toward operating as their best self. We had an awesome chat with some very practical takeaways. Enjoy this one, guys.
What's your definition of call it a performance mindset?
Yeah. It's, the way that I think about performance mindset, look, we've all heard about the now famous classifications and definitions of what's a fixed mindset versus what's a growth mindset. And fixed mindset is just those people who really prioritize status quo. They don't want things to change. Change is scary. Change is something they don't want to touch. It's almost like a fire where if you touch it, you get burned. It's having no appreciation for the risk of failure and being stretched and challenged. Where on the other side, you've got the growth mindset, where it's that foundational belief that with the right amount of energy, effort, and time, you can increase your intelligence, you can develop new skills, you can overcome obstacles. There's nothing stopping you from really becoming whatever it is you want to become. Here's the challenge that I've seen and why I've started my own firm and branded it Performance Mindset is that the vast majority of those people who identify with a growth mindset aren't doing anything that much different than the ones with a fixed mindset. Or said differently, there was little to no action behind their beliefs. They may be saying the right things. They may be thinking the right things. You go on their LinkedIn profiles, they may be, posting all the right things. But if you really look at their habits, their actions, their routines, they're in just as much of a comfort zone as anybody else. And so their performance mindset and how that separates from a growth mindset is it's really the next level. So it's that small minority of the people who already have a growth mindset, but they have a little something extra. And that is a willingness and a desire to actually put action behind that, to get comfortable being uncomfortable, to stretch themselves, to challenge themselves, having a bigger appetite for risk and failure and the failure that comes along with it. But said very simply is they're actually doing something about that belief. They're showing up every day with a continuous improvement edge of just trying to get that 1% better each and every single day.
Yeah, it's really about the doing and the taking action. You've touched on comfort zone. I think we both know that fear is a big factor in that. So how do we the awesome thing about this show is exactly what you're saying. Like I started attempting these small kind of 1%ers and it didn't matter as to whether they kind of failed or not. I always learned something. Mm-hmm. And they weren't, the challenges I've done so far, they weren't like jumping out of a plane or anything like that. It was really like the little things that are in some ways can be harder, but they've always shown me something. And I just love a personal challenge. That's how this came about. But stepping into that discomfort, how do you recommend people take steps towards? I guess fear is a big factor, right?
Oh, fear is the big factor. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think when you look at the average person and our own internal relationships that we have with fear, it always starts there. So we've been led to believe growing up, whether in our personal lives or in our business life, as failure is bad. You do things to make the scoreboard look good, get the trophy, get the medal, get the promotion. Those are the things that you're striving for. And so failure, really up until recently hasn't been, for lack of a better term, celebrated the way that it needs to for the average person to change their relationship with it. So instead of treating failure or setbacks or missteps almost like fire, where it's like you don't touch it because you'll get burned, I think that's where that perspective shift needs to occur. And the one thing that I like to propose to others, and especially the clients that I work with, is we have to change that negative association with failure. Failure is nothing more than a learning feedback loop. It's inevitable to be part on your journey. If you say what you really are, and that is that growth mindset individual, some degree of failure comes along with growth. It's not separate from success. Failure is part of success. And so I think when we can change our relationship with how we think about failure, how we embrace failure, and what failure really means, is look on the other side of it. We're so much smarter. We're so much wiser. We're so much better informed. We're so much more knowledgeable on the other side of failure. That's the part we need to really embrace and celebrate. Because if we can start treating failure and the fear of failure as just that learning feedback loop, and it's just one of those great mechanisms along the way that helps us get better, then we change our relationship with fear. And I always like to propose this question of, imagine what your life would look like if you redefined the fear of failure or failure itself from not achieving something to instead defining it as not trying something. I suspect a lot of people's lives looking back would be very different if that's how they truly started to define failure and change their relationship of the fear of failure.
The reframe is an awesome concept, actually, to reframe it, and then perhaps be able to embrace that willingness and brave the risk of failure. Yeah, the reframe, the perspective shift. Failure. Listening to you, failure has a bit of a stigma to it.
Yeah. It's like, it's one of those things that we're almost trained, growing up, is like, stay away from it. You don't fail. Don't do these things or you'll fail. And it's just like, yes, while you never, failure should never be part of the plan. That doesn't mean that we have to completely shy away from it. All of the growth occurs when we're operating on the very outer edges of our current capabilities. And so when you're operating there, I hate to break it to you, but failure is just going to be part of that journey. It is inevitable. And this is what separates those that continuously and consistently find new levels of growth versus ones that don't, is ones that encounter some of that failure and then reverse back into their comfort zone, versus the ones that embrace that failure as a learning loop and say, okay, what did I learn from that? What will I change next time? And how do I recalibrate my approach to my very next step being more effective than my previous step? And so it's really, I don't know another way other than at least starting to have that perspective shift and change that relationship that we have around fear and the fear of failure, which is the most predominant fear that kind of stops growth. I think it starts with just how we think about it, what our own personal relationship is with it. And that's typically going to make or break the journey ahead in either finding new levels of success or continue to be scared from this perception of fear that keeps us in the illusion of the safety of our comfort zone.
I really like the word recalibration, to recalibrate. It's almost approach it in a bit more of a systematic way, in a sense.
Yeah.
Recalibration.
I think that's a great call out. And it's one that I've always kind of thought about is, I think when we think about personal development and we think about leadership development, we think about the journey to becoming the next best version of ourselves, there really is no finish line. I mean, there's always going to be improvements. And so when you can kind of think about that as we're playing the infinite game here, we're not playing the finite game. there's always going to be a next level. And so when we can kind of think about this pursuit of perfection that we know we're never going to chase, but it's not about that destination, it's about the journey. We can always think and use that anchor of recalibration as just a way to deal with the obstacles, the setbacks, the mistakes, the failures along the way. It's just that it's more dots that we now have on the game board that we're able to connect to recalibrate our approach. And I think that's, kind of back to your initial question. I think that's why the fear of failure is so predominant, is that people don't have a lot of people, I would say, don't have that relationship. And so they think of failure of any kind, no matter how big or small, is almost an identity crisis. Like it cuts to their core. It's like, if I fail at this, then I'm a failure. They have trouble separating identity with outcome, when that couldn't be further from the truth. The most successful people are the ones that fail the most. And it's just how they deal with it. It's kind of the famous quote that, Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, said, is I've never failed. I just found 10,000 different ways that this won't work, and I think that's just all part of the recalibration process that is the journey of finding the best version of ourselves.
That's a prime example of the reframe right there.
Mm-hmm.
I've personally bombed publicly many times in my past, and that taught me so much. Playing music and various creative pursuits and things, and it's just I've really learned to embrace it. But yeah, like we say, just stretching a little bit. If you can just stretch that little bit, that's where the growth can happen. Do you have?
I think it's why I love the 1% rule, right? And everybody wants the big billboard headline, the big just loud announcement that I just made it from here to this level to that level, when it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes it's the very small incremental improvements that if you weren't looking for, you may not even see it on a day over day basis. But it's those little incremental improvements, continuing to inch that your own standard of excellence that you have for yourself higher and higher and higher each and every single day, is going to stack up to amazing results over the long term. And so, I think what sits along that journey is lots of learning lessons. I mean, without that experience, it's extraordinarily difficult to have that sustained performance mindset that you can put in place over the long term that then lets the compound interest of those incremental gains really start to do the work for you.
Was there, did you find in your personal or professional life, there was a kind of a moment where you sort of had enough and then you had to make a change?
Oh, yeah. Glad you brought that up. So, look, my origin story is really, I was put into a leadership position at a very early age, 23 years old, kind of, put in charge of a business category that was generating, roughly $100 million of revenue per year. And so I was kind of thrown into the deep end. And while I was able to grind my way through in a very unoptimized way, I found myself 6-7 years later as, a member of the executive leadership team for this company, a $1 billion plus company, at the age of 30. And so while that's the headline, what sits underneath that was I'm confident that I've made every mistake there was to make as a young and up and coming executive. And it was at that moment that I realized the danger of complacency and arrogance. And so I've had some success. I had more success at an early age than I even, aspired to have for myself. And, it's amazing what happens on the other side of success. Is it's then so easy to think that you have it all figured out. It's very easy to think that you're the smartest one in the room, or you stop doing some of the things that you were doing to kind of get to that level. It's a famous coach refers to this as a success disease. And man, did I catch that whenever I got there. And so it was a very hard moment in my life where success continued to happen for me up until a certain point where I hit a brick wall. And it took me looking back and getting some outside perspective to say, everything that got me to this point is not going to get me to the next point. Or as another great saying goes, is what got me here is not going to get me there. And I really had to do some soul searching. I had to check my ego at the door. I had to realize I was successful in spite of my weaknesses, not because of how great I was. And so I had to go back and basically recreate myself. Everything that I was doing up to that certain point, I wasn't happy with the person that I became. I wasn't happy with how I was leading people. I wasn't happy with how I was addressing my weaknesses and kind of overlooking them. And so, I think for me, it was the complacency and the arrogance that came on the other side of success that really pulled me out of that performance mindset and put me into a fixed mindset without even knowing it. This happens so easily with people that experience success. And a lot of people don't recover. That just becomes the normal plateau that a lot of people coast at for the rest of their careers. And it took me kind of going back into the lab, onto the drawing board, and bringing on some outside help in the form of coaching that really helped get me recentered and get me refocused on growing myself to find new levels of success. And so it was a humbling moment for me, and one that forced me to realize you're not as good as you think you are. And that's a tough message we have to tell ourselves sometimes.
Nothing beats a little bit of humble pie, right?
That's right.
But that's so interesting, man. Like the kind of flip side of the coin to have what people might perceive as to have all that so young, but then have a complete kind of reset in a way.
And it's something that I had to learn the hard way that now shows up in my work of how I'm able to now help other people who may be in similar situations at the point of their career that I was in. And I like to tell people all the time, there's only one thing more painful from not achieving the goal you want to achieve. And that pain is achieving the goal that you realize after the fact was the wrong goal. Mm. And that's what happened to me. I was chasing all the wrong things. I didn't have a high level of self-awareness. I didn't have clarity. I became essentially my external environment, where I was on the corporate rat race. I was chasing money. I was chasing title, and I was willing to give up just about everything to get it. And it's kind of like that dog that catches the car, right? It's like, once you have the fender in its mouth, then what the hell are you going to do? And that's kind of what happened to me. It's like something scary happens when you achieve the goals that you set out, only to realize that they were the wrong goals. And so that's where you can really find yourself of, it's like, man, I've been coasting these past couple of years. I've been complacent. I've been too arrogant. I've shifted out of a learning mode into this smartest person in the room mode, where there's no return on investment from having that type of position. There's no learning, no growth, no development there. And so, it was a tough moment for me internally, even though externally it looked like I may have had it all. But I think that's what happens when you don't have the awareness and the clarity behind why you're chasing the things that you're chasing. If you're pursuing something you don't really need, you'll never have enough. And that's not a great feeling to have whenever you realize that that's your reality. And so it takes some going back to the drawing board.
Did you have to kind of physically step away as well to get kind of everything in context, or were you just, it was more your personal struggle where you were, like, to step outside of it? Did you actually have to physically change? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, there was some physical aspects to it. I mean, I really had to rethink my environments, rethink the situations I was putting myself in, rethink a lot of what is what does my inner circle look like? Are the people around me leveling me up, or am I finding myself leveling down, kind of be in that environment? So yeah, there were some physical changes that had to occur, and really thinking about what situations, what scenarios, what associations am I putting myself in and around, to really kind of get that clarity. And yeah, there was some solo trips in there where I just needed kind of what I refer to as, mind clearing trips, where you just kind of go to a location by yourself and really think, really get things out of your head on paper, and like understanding what's most important for me. Where do my values sit? What's authentic to me? And then doing a very firm, kind of brutally honest audit of saying, if these are the outputs that I'm trying to deliver, do my inputs really match up with this? Or are these things that are am I doing the things that are going to get me where I want to go? And that audit can be very telling for a lot of people. And you kind of find out that there's a lot more misalignments than there is alignments. And there's some things that has to change, both from an internal and external standpoint.
The gradual stepping toward alignment is so cool. Like, I've really learned to trust in that now. It's also taken me a long time, but just to like we say, it's about the journey. There's no doesn't have to happen overnight. But now right. that I definitely feel far more in alignment, like yourself, it's a really awesome place to be, because it's funny. There's certain things that I do that would seem anxiety provoking, but I'm very comfortable. And there's other things that aren't anxiety provoking, and I just feel misaligned with it. And it's like, if I stay in those things that are anxiety provoking, it's weird, but it's cool, It's sort of that the clarity that comes with the alignment, and you had to face that brutal truth. The auditing, again, the sort of not airy-fairy, but practical approach to this stuff, recalibration, auditing. How do we make these little changes? So I guess it would be fair to say, almost cliche, but your definition of success would be completely different now.
Oh yeah, 100%. And that's, it's funny that you just brought up that question, because that's one of the important tools that I'll share with you and your audience here, that I take clients through to help calibrate and find the alignment there. And it really boils down to three big questions that we should all ask ourselves. One, it's the question that you just brought up. How are we defining success for ourselves? Not according to what we want to see on an Instagram feed or what is expected from our external network or social circles, but going deep inside and truly looking out over the long term. And how are you defining success for your life is a very important question to get some clarity on, because that then sets up the next question, which is question number 2. And it's really the same question, but around happiness. What does happiness look like for me? True, genuine joy, happiness. Like, what is it? What would your ideal day be like, where you're hitting high levels? There's no perfect world utopia, but when you're able to operate at high levels of happiness, morning, afternoon, and night, then the third question is what brings it all together. Is based on your responses to those first 2 questions. How do you define happiness? What does happiness look like? Or how do you define success, and what does happiness look like? Are those 2 things in harmony and aligned with each other, or do they conflict with each other? And it's only a question that we'll be able to kind of answer ourselves. And so many people that I work with that are on this emerging executive leadership trajectory are finding themselves in a very similar situation that I was in. And that was giving up too much of one side to chase the other side, only to achieve it And once all the quote unquote bills start to come due from especially the happiness side, that's when people start to realize, wow, I paid too much of a cost to achieve this. If I could do it all over again, I would have recalibrated my definition here to make sure that I don't give up too much here. And it's such an important clarity and awareness tool to just really exercise on our own, because the greater that those two things are misaligned, the more unhappiness, the more lack of fulfillment, the more emptiness we're going to feel, versus when those two things are in strong alignment. That's where you're going to find yourself operating on mission, operating with a strong sense of purpose, knowing the clarity behind why you're doing what you're doing. So yeah, I can't recommend that tool enough to make sure that how you're defining success, and then understanding what happiness looks like for you, and making sure that there's alignment there between those two journeys. And it makes all the difference in the world.
Looking at the push and pull between the two things. Yeah. Are they working in some kind of harmony, or are they really far removed and out of whack?
That's right. Because if you give up all of how you're defining happiness to achieve success, thinking that the happiness is going to come after you achieve what you want to achieve, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it just doesn't work that way. It
doesn't work. Or sacrificing time and health for something else, or say for money or whatever. But and then, well, what good is that if you don't have your health and you've lost your time?
That's exactly right. And so often when I see people give up all of this to achieve this, it always shows up in the form of regret. And that is, I gave up too much to achieve what I wanted to achieve, because when I set this goal, when I set this initiative in motion, I was doing it based on a lack of awareness and clarity around how I was defining success for myself. You may be chasing a number or a title or a status thing, whatever it is. And you really think about, well, is that how I'm defining success for myself? Or is that how the external environment around me is kind of celebrating success? And that's where that big kind of regret factor shows up, is like when you give up too much of your happiness to chase something that you think is going to make you successful. It's that black hole that shows up when you achieve it, is you realize that you just achieved the wrong goal. And and you can't go and get all that time back. You can't go and repair overnight all the failed relationships, or maybe there was a divorce along the way and you're not as close to your kids, whatever it is, all those sacrifices that you had to give up along that journey. You now realize in an instant, damn, I would have done things a lot differently had I would have made sure that there was some alignment between those two things.
Yeah, what an awesome lesson for you to learn so young. The priority, the equilibrium, getting things in equilibrium. Very cool. I just thought of something before. When you were asking those questions, the 3 questions, I actually had a therapist a long time ago when I was very much in a call it a misaligned state. He asked me, if you had tomorrow to yourself, what would be your ideal day? And I couldn't answer it, and that was a sign of where I was at. It was like I actually couldn't really at that time in my life define it. Whereas now I could fill that with awesome stuff. But it just reminded me. I just remember being really puzzled when I was asked, what would what would that day look like to you?
And it's such a great story to share, and it really encompasses my work. While I'm not a therapist, and I do spend most of my time with leaders and executives, but it's all the same. And it's really my job description is basically boiled down in 3 bullet points. One, we identify and articulate and paint a very accurate picture on what the current state looks like. And I think that's why everything that I do starts from a place of awareness. So if you're building a journey, the foundation has to be built in strong awareness, or everything else you build on top of it could be a house of cards. So strong awareness is the foundation to all next level growth. And so we always have to get that strong sense of what is the current state. We can't improve or enhance something we're not aware of, and vice versa. We can't remove blockers that are holding us back that we're not aware of. Lastly, or second, is just as you mentioned, we do the work to design, to curate, and to really paint that picture of what ideal state looks like. And so once we kind of have these 2 islands of current state and ideal state, does that ideal state check those 2 boxes? Is this how you're defining success? Is this going to give you the happiness that kind of you're seeking? And is your why strong enough behind that ideal state that it's going to allow us to figure out all the hows? The last part's just building that bridge. And so what are the elements that takes us from current state to ideal state the fastest? So when you can break it down to its simplest form like that, it's the 3 major components: is where am I right now? Why? What led me here? What are my superpowers? What are my kryptonites? What are the things I need to be aware of? What does ideal look like for me? Then it becomes it's like plugging two things into a GPS. It's very easy to kind of get the directions once you have those 2 things. But also, if you don't have the starting from location or the destination to plug in, the GPS is going to have a hard time of creating a path for you to kind of get there efficiently. And I think that's the problem I'm trying to solve, is so few people don't have a clear path to their ideal state, it's because they're missing one of those 2 data points: clarity on the current state, or even understanding what ideal state is. Because once you can do that work, building that transformation bridge becomes a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, the why and the awareness are just massive. I mean, the awareness is the core of
it's the core.
It really is the core. You can't, like you say, you can't bring change to something if the awareness isn't there. And it can be awareness on a really small bite-size piece, really small level, just bringing a subtle amount of change to becoming aware of something, bringing some change to it, not being overwhelmed by some huge, but a real like tangible small piece, bringing awareness to it, try and change it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of tools that are out there, and I've tried to develop tools because I'm a big believer in making things, breaking them down into programs and systems that can be used by anybody well beyond, a conversation with me. I don't want someone's personal or leadership development for me to be a dependency in there. And so I love tools and frameworks and programs that, just like kind of the 3 questions that we used earlier, that's something that people can continue to ask themselves on either a monthly basis, quarterly basis for the rest of their lives to always, make sure that there's alignment. So yeah, a big part of my engagements are finding these programs and tools that, can be used on a frequent basis for the rest of their lives and careers, that always kind of brings them back to, okay, what's the main thing? How am I keeping the main thing the main thing? And I just think tools and programs are so effective in helping cut through the noise that is life and bringing these important inputs to the surface.
That brings us nicely to what I like to do here on the show is for guests to offer listeners a challenge. So do you have one of those tools or something that might be useful for the community to try?
Yeah. So, I think a big part of awareness is reflection. I think they go hand in hand. And a lot of people, especially late at night when when they're by themselves. And it's easy to not reflect because just continuing on with status quo is a much more frictionless path. Going back and reflecting, you're mining all the data, all the wisdom, all the knowledge, and it's not always a comfortable process. And so to break this down into an easy executable tool, one of the things that I have my clients do is what I refer to as a 3-2-1 reflection exercise. And this is best used at the end of the week. Some people, I've got clients that like to do this on Fridays when they're kind of, wrapping up their work week. I got some clients who use, Sunday afternoons as kind of a planning and strategizing time of looking back on the week and then planning out the week ahead. Whenever you want to use it, I recommend it being somewhere kind of at the tail end of your week to really look back and ask yourself a couple of important questions that go into this 3-2-1 exercise. First, the number 3. Think of 3 things that went really well for you during the week. And these don't have to be huge, big achievements, but what are the 3 things that went well for you that you really felt good about, you really felt proud about? And then go a layer deeper. Why did those things go well? Try to find the common threads. What did you do to set up that success? What went in? Was it preparation? How did you create the scenario that you are now chalking up as a win for the week? So identify 3 of those and then just write out, why did each of these things go well? And see if you can kind of spot the common threads that you can look to magnify and amplify in the weeks ahead. The number 2 is, what are 2 things that didn't go as well as you wanted? What are 2 things that you really want to improve from the prior week? And the write out assignment becomes, what specifically will you do, or how will you improve these things in the week ahead or in the future? And so it's really identifying the same thing as the catalyst to what went well, some of the things that showed up that really didn't generate the results you wanted, and it's identifying how you will change them. And then the last question for the number 1 is, what did you learn about yourself through this reflection process, and why is that important? And so that's a great question to come back to the clarity exercise we talked about earlier, is when you're finding out what's going well, when you're finding out the things that need to be improved on, why is this important to you? And so it's a great way to always come back to, is this aligning with how you're defining success? Is this aligning with how you're defining happiness? So it's a reflection exercise that you can do every week that really just centers everything down to drive the awareness that's always going to make you more effective the very next week. So that's, without fail, one of the tools that just generates incredible awareness and insights, and just has a pretty big impact when you're really thinking about, how do I get better next week than I am this week? This is an incredible tool that can really help that journey.
That's awesome, I must say. I'm going to definitely try it. I really like the concept of doing the exercise and then pulling something out of the exercise itself, like that third point. And I like the ratio of 3, call it positives to 2. What are the wins?
Yeah,
in a way. No, that's an awesome the reflection.
Yeah, I think having to articulate the whys behind it is where you can always find knowledge, insight, and wisdom. Because if you just had a successful meeting, you gave a great presentation, sure, that's surface level. Why did that go so successful? It's like, I put in this preparation time. I met with a mentor. I did all. You start to create your own blueprint for continued success by mining out why things went well, while also figuring out what needs to change. How will you change for the things that didn't generate the results that you wanted? So I think between those 2 things, it's just a simple way to create your own growth blueprint.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I mean, it could potentially just be a matter of 20 minutes or half an hour at the end of the week.
I would actually recommend, the shorter the better. And once you kind of start developing some muscle memory, and it's amazing how the mind works. And so when you start training the mental models, so to speak, you start developing a filter for this during the week. It's like, oh, that's going to be one there. So you get to the end of the week and you've got clarity on the question, what the win was, and why you won. And so it almost becomes this new filter at which you have a mental model that you can place these different experiences in within a framework that allows you to really mine and extract the key insight and wisdom that's needed to make you better the very next week.
That's so much more unique in a way than like just doing like a standard to-do list or something. I'm not taking away from like the practicalities of things, but it's like, yeah, my Sunday night, I'm going to do the to-do list. That's can be just as important, but to do that reflection, there's a lot of potential growth and
and it really ties in nicely back to that initial question you asked me, and that's, what is a performance mindset? And in my answer behind what separates a growth mindset versus a performance mindset, this tool is a great example of this is what performance mindset individuals do. And so if someone were to ask them, well, you may have all the right thoughts and beliefs, but how are you getting better? This could be a shining example of this is a tool that used consistently. It's going to be hard to not get better. You're almost shining a light on how to get better. You would almost have to ignore your own advice and your own findings. So there's always going to be at least a small percentage of that gets naturally applied the very next week. And so this is the difference from just thinking and believing to actually taking action, to even carving out that 15 to 20 minutes to do the exercise, writing it down, almost creating a reflection journal of all the findings week over week. And you're creating a book for yourself on how to generate better results. But even at 15 minutes, it sounds easy sitting here, talking about it, but the willingness, the desire, the taking action to set aside that time, do the exercise, write it down, and then retain that information. That's what separates the different mindsets of just thinking you have a growth mindset to actually operating with a performance mindset. So it's just a great example right there of what separates the two.
Yeah, for sure. And it's amazing how hard it can be for all of us sometimes to just find that tiny space within the day, just rein it in and do it. But yeah, I love how executable it is. You're not throwing some kind of wishy-washy notion out. It's really, really practical. So very cool.
Exactly it.
Yeah. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. So I would love to, connect with anyone on your audience there. And, you can also go to my website to find more. And that's easily found at performancemindsetcoaching.co. And so we can put it into the show notes there. But yeah, everything that any further questions you have around, what does it mean to have a performance mindset? What makes up my approach and my methodology is found there. And I'm sharing performance mindset type of content almost daily on LinkedIn. So would love to connect and engage with you there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for being so honest about your story and just, because it's very, very, very unique. So thank you so much for all the insights.
No, thank you for having me. This was a great conversation.